All right. Well, hello. Thanks for joining. I didn't want to take too long on the introduction. I just wanted to dive right into things and say what I've really wanted to say, which is I really do think that there's a very serious problem that is extremely dangerous and that is just on the horizon that can really threaten our lives and the lives of everyone that we love, and in fact, the life of everyone on Earth. And and I do think that it's necessary that this be pushed more to the mainstream, that more people are talking about this. And of course, what I'm talking about is the development of artificial intelligence, and specifically of models that are extremely capable and that have general abilities that can do a lot of different things. They can be good coders, they can be good at composing persuasive arguments, and eventually they can be good at computer usage and at driving towards certain goals or objectives in a wide variety of domains and fields to solve difficult problems. So I I suppose that there's probably two things that we can talk about. The first is why I think that this is extremely dangerous, or why I believe this is very dangerous. And I guess we can talk about this. We will talk about this eventually in the future. But for today, I actually wanted to focus, to take that for granted, like to assume this, and to talk about what to do about it. So, so where we are right now is the models that we have. They are becoming more and more capable very rapidly. People debate as to how quickly exactly they're growing in capabilities and whether they'll plateau at some point or not. What I personally have been using to chart how models have been improving is the analysis by a group called Metr, which is a group that evaluates essentially model capabilities. And they have this like super famous chart that breaks down how models are improving in quote unquote long horizon tasks, meaning tasks that will require longer and longer, that would take a human longer and longer times to accomplish. So you can imagine that tasks that would take a problem that would take a human a really long time to accomplish would require a lot of more complex goal-oriented thinking, because you need to, usually if it's a big problem, it has to be broken down into sub-problems and each has to be tackled in turn. And so I think it's a pretty good measure for that part of intelligence, the human capability of reasoning through problems and solving them, that is really critical or crucial to artificial intelligence, and essentially what makes it dangerous also. And so it does a pretty good job of measuring that. And what they've been showing is that models are roughly doubling in capabilities every 7 months, which is exponential growth. That is, by definition, it's if you pick some time period, the rate of doubling is the same over successive increments of that time period. So that's extremely rapid pace of growth. If you're doubling every 7 months, and actually for Metro, this group, they have also said that they think that the pace of doubling this doubling time period is actually shorter for more advanced models. They were saying that for a while, but let's just stick to the 7-month estimate. So that means if you're doubling every 7 months, that means that you're jumping an order of magnitude in capabilities every roughly 2 years. So that's extremely rapid progress. Now, let's say that you assume that the methods that we have right now for controlling these models are not going to work as the models grow in capability. Let's assume that future that you think will end up at, if this goes unchecked, is a very, very bad future. How do you go about strategizing or planning now to prevent this future from coming about? I think there are two sides of the same coin, essentially, that you can pursue. The first is there are essentially technical fields that deal with exactly this problem. So those are the technical fields of alignment and interpretability. Interpretability is like you're trying to understand what is going on inside the models themselves. Alignment is you're trying to come up with a theory for how preferences form in models, like and then how you can guide those preferences by either modifying the architecture or modifying the training to guide those preferences to stuff that humans want. So that's the technical direction. And then the second face of the coin is to slow down capability such that alignment, the safety work, can catch up. And in the best case scenario, if scientists are able to crack alignment, then you slow it down enough to give them enough resources so that they crack the problem. And in the worst, and of course there are all sorts of questions, which is who gets to decide when the problem is really solved or not. I mean, that's a massive problem, but let's just put that aside for now. And the second part, or perhaps there's a growing conviction or maybe an outright proof that such a problem is unsolvable. In which case, the slow down, the idea of slowing down progress has to transition to permanently stop progress in this area. So that's, or at least permanently stop progress until there can be some new, like, innovative ideas that can change this consensus that's forming, that this is an unsolvable problem. So I want to focus mainly on that second part, the slowdown part, and to talk about how that can actually be achieved. Ultimately, slowing down capabilities, slowing down the speed at which models are growing increasingly capable, this is a political problem. It's a problem that can be solved at the level of policy. But there are many issues, many unique issues, and some issues that are common to pushing this, to solving this political problem. But I'll just tackle two such issues right now. So the first issue is that this is not a national problem, it's an international problem. The US is currently ahead in model development, but China is not far behind. They're only a few months behind. So even if there was even if either, like a political movement or a political coalition that has this objective of halting or slowing down progress, even if that was successful in the US, if it did begin to implement its policies in the US, in theory, this only buys a few months before China catches up to the same point that the US is at, and then we're right back where we started. So, um, and even if you stop progress in the US and China, there's still labs in Europe, and plus all those scientists and researchers and engineers that are driving progress in the US and China, they can physically move somewhere else, or the leaders of those companies can move somewhere else and set up shop somewhere else. So it's not, even if you were to get coordinated political action in both the US and China, it's not a permanent solution. But I do think that for now, it does make sense to just focus on those two nations, for a variety of reasons. I mean, those are, first of all, the two nations that are ahead, the two political entities that really will control development at the cutting edge for right now and for probably for the foreseeable future. So if you implement policies in both those nations to stop, then I think that that is sufficient for now. So that's one difficulty, and actually they're inextricably linked too. So, if you want the political movement to halt model development to succeed in the U.S., that task would be easier if people in the U.S., if policymakers in the U.S. see that a similar movement is also successful in China, right? Because if one of the arguments that will come up inevitably by policymakers, if the U.S. tries to halt development, is, well, all you're doing is you're just giving China time to catch up, and there's a strategic rivalry between the two countries, so there's a strong incentive for you to keep pushing if your geopolitical rival is also developing this technology. So solving the political problem in one country actually helps with the solution in another country. And I do think that there needs to be close collaboration between those pushing these political ideas in the two nations. Okay, this is one aspect of the problem. The second one that I wanted to talk about is timelines. So if you assume that, if you take this as a relatively accurate measure, that models are doubling in capability every 7 months, which means that they're growing by an order of magnitude every roughly 2 years. So if you take that, then that means that the time period between which you're having noticeable issues with models, where you're beginning to see problems, and when those problems become really existential for humanity, that time period might be very short. So now this is based on a few assumptions. Again, as I said, this is not guaranteed to be the case. It could be that time period, so by very short, if we just assume the current scaling laws, that things continue as they have been going in the past, the 7-month doubling rate, then, and let's assume that if a model is beginning to be a noticeable problem, that it takes maybe an order of magnitude or 2 order of magnitudes improvements before it's like an existential risk to humanity. If you take that as the case, then that means that we have between 2 and 4 years between when these models begin to be noticeably like dangerous, where people can begin to realize like, oh, like this might not end well, and when it's a catastrophic disaster. So that's not a very long period of time. 2 to 4 years is a very short time in politics. That's half a presidential term in the US. Extremely short time period. So there might not be a lot of time to react to what's happening. So that's so those are kind of two problems. There are other problems that make the political solution, make this a particularly difficult political problem to solve. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how I kind of see this possibly, or the most likely way that I think that this will transpire, like that models will increase in capabilities. Because I think that will inform the political strategy, which people who are pushing this, who want to slow this technology down, the political strategy that they should pursue. So if we assume scaling at the current rate, I think that at some point, so right now people are saying that models are exhibiting dangerous signs, and yes, there is evidence of models beginning to exhibit dangerous signs. There have been some real world effects from especially like model sycophancy. So it will tell people what it thinks they want to hear. And so it can exacerbate like mental health issues. It can even has been shown to assist people with like suicide. So that has already been a real world impact. But it's relatively minor. Like, of course, it's a big deal to the families that have lost people because of this. But if we're talking like comparatively, compared to like 10% of the human population dying, like this is a relatively mild issue currently. And then the other dangerous signs have been like in testing. So people say, oh, models are like scheming in testing. They're behaving in ways that aren't perfectly aligned with the interests of the company that's training them. So, but that's not something that affects people directly yet. But I mean, people that are in the field can kind of see where this is headed. Like, it's not very hard to see. So those are the only signs right now. But I think, so I would say that this is not yet, we're not really in a situation where we're having crises. But I think that between now and when this becomes like an existential risk, there will be increasingly serious crises as a result of this technology. Now that this might not happen, and there are all sorts of situations. I don't think it's necessarily wise to count on this happening. There's always the possibility that, all these companies are building these massive data centers. Could be tomorrow that someone in academia comes up with an architecture that seems to be better at scaling than the current architecture, and it works on a small scale, and then all the companies jump on this new research and start building on this architecture with their massive amounts of compute that they have, and then all of a sudden we skip that whole intermediate crisis phase and go straight to the existential risk overnight. That's possible. But let's assume that doesn't happen, that there's this increasingly serious crises that begin to happen at some point in time, and they will grow and become more and more serious and more dangerous until we slip into the territory of existential risk. So that can look like that, at some point models are becoming increasingly capable, and so companies begin to run them, to run agents that can be given a task to accomplish, and with minimal human oversight, because it's cheaper to do it that way, and the models do something really seriously bad. So it can begin with, they actually obviously break the law in some situations, and even maybe scheme and then break the law. So that can be an early warning sign in the real world that will kind of alert someone that something very bad is coming here. Or maybe you will reach a point at which maybe at some point a model actually kills someone. And you can see in its chain of reasoning that it actually reasoned through, it intended to kill that person. So right now, if models assist with suicide, they're, I guess, trying to help the user. This is, if you look at their chain of reasoning, this is what they're saying. No, I'm going to help them. They want to do this, so I'm helping. But what if a model is intentionally, thinking to itself with intention to kill someone? That's a different milestone, and that's something that we might experience as well. But all of this is just to make it imaginable what that would look like when these crises actually begin. And then you're going to have from then on till the point of no return, till the point at which now models are capable enough that if they are misaligned, that we have no way of really stopping them. So we can think about how long what the time periods look like, but we think about it through this frame. I think it makes a lot of sense. There's pre-crisis, which is, I would say, where we are right now. There's the period of crisis, where there's increasingly obvious signs that something is dangerously bad here. And then there is the point of no return, the region of really existential risk, where you now have something that can threaten the existence of humans, and then it's hard to see a way out at that point. So I think if we had to put timelines on it, I think currently, according to Metr, the 50% cutoff rate, so I should probably talk just very briefly about this. So essentially what you do is, to get the numbers that they're getting, they will have a bunch of software engineering tasks that they give a bunch of humans, and they see how long it takes the humans to accomplish this particular software engineering task. So then you average that out, and then you have a model try to solve these exact same problems that the humans have been solving. And what you can imagine is that if a problem is taking humans a shorter time period to accomplish, that the model will be more successful at solving those problems because they tend to be simpler. Whereas problems that would take humans a long time to solve, models would struggle with them more because they tend to be more complicated, have more intermediate steps, require longer horizon thinking and planning. So that's effectively how they get their measure. And you can imagine that there will be some point, some period of task at which models accomplish on average about 50% of those kinds of problems. So let's say, for example, I think right now that 50% crossover period is 3 hours. So with the best models that we have right now, you can give them a software engineering task. If you give them a software engineering task that would take a human about 3 hours, assuming that their findings actually generalize to all software engineering tasks, then you can give them a problem that would take a human software engineer under 3 hours to solve. If you give them a task that would take a human software engineer under 3 hours to solve, the model would be more than 50% likely to accomplish this task successfully. If it's over 3 hours, then a model is less than 50% likely to accomplish that task. And if it's exactly, it would take your average software engineer about 3 hours to accomplish, that means that the model would have a roughly 50% chance of accomplishing this task. So I think that probably if models had an order of magnitude, so if they could accomplish, if that cutoff period, that 50% cutoff period was at 30 hours instead of 3 hours, we would probably begin to see problems. You probably at that point have models that are powerful enough that you can really run them without supervision for a large tract of time, and long enough tracts of time that you can begin to see issues if they're misaligned. So order of magnitude, which means roughly 2 years, 2.5 years. So I'd expect that probably in like 2.5 years, we would begin to enter the crisis phase, assuming, again, trends hold and that their problems generalize to all software engineering problems, and that software engineering problems loosely also like generalize to like a standard level of model capability. So that means pre-crisis period, we have about 2 years, 2.5 years. And then once the crisis period starts, you again might have 2 to 4 years of increasingly dangerous, more and more dangerous signs. And then it would be probably too late. So if we think that this is how things will unfold, what is the wisest political action that we can take now to prevent a bad outcome, to interrupt this process? I think that probably what you'd want to do, especially in this pre-crisis period, is you'd want to begin to spread the message and organize. I think it's important that everyone is aware that there are people out there, that it's in the zeitgeist of people, that this is dangerous. There are some people out there that are saying this. And because then what will happen is, like right now, it's not really a serious danger. Like people have inertia. People feel like those that are driving the progress know more or less what they're doing. But when the crises start, that will be shaken. That faith that people have will begin to be shaken. And if there's already people out there that are pushing this alternative method, this alternative understanding that this is extremely dangerous, that this will likely end humanity, then those people will be vindicated by the facts. And so that's where I see this. That's where I see this. That's what I see as the goal of this time period now. It's just to establish in the public square that this is an actual position that people hold, so that when things begin to go bad, there is already some sort of like there's already a political culture out there that predicted this. But yeah, so that's pretty much all that I wanted to say for this particular video. I really do think it's a moral responsibility that all of us have to be ready for everyone that does think that this is actually dangerous. Like, it's important to seriously prepare, because when things begin to unfold, I think it will ultimately count on people to understand the events that are occurring, to move forward, to channel the fear that people will have at that point to constructive political ends that are actually effective. And to illustrate this, I want to just talk about one example of how things can go, of how things might go if there isn't that political movement there. So let's imagine that things unfold exactly in the time frame that I laid out, and in roughly like 2 years or 2.5 years, you begin to have really serious problems. You begin to have crises. Probably the most likely outcome of the first crises is that companies will no longer begin will no longer begin releasing their most advanced models to the public. Research will go underground. So people will continue to develop models internally, but they won't share them out with the world because, in the world, models can be exposed to all sorts of edge cases and stuff, and they might do bad things, and so it will hurt the company's PR. So probably the most natural course of events that would unfold is companies would just simply not release their most advanced models, and they would just work on them internally. And that would be absolutely catastrophic, because that would prevent us from seeing the increasingly dangerous signs that these models are misaligned. That within the company, this is a controlled environment, and models are not being confronted really with the whole world, with all the different humans and all their different requests. And so you're not really testing the model to the full to see where the dangers are, where the cracks are. And a company is incentivized to keep things internal. Not to say that something is, dangerous and to demand that model advances be halted. So that's why at that point you need a political organization. So when the first crises happen, the dominant message can be, these crises can give legitimacy to the people that have been warning about this. And then those people can bring to the public the right arguments about what to do. That in this case, if all that you're doing is just you harm the companies, but you don't interrupt operations, there's nothing beyond that, then all you're doing is you're incentivizing the companies to develop the models internally, out of public view. And that's worse. As bad as the crises are, it's worse that models continue to improve and us not be able to see that there's increasing danger, increasing warning signs. So that's why you need an actual, a informed political organization or movement that's speaking about this. And so that's essentially where I've landed. And it's hard though. It's hard to know what to do. This is a very short period in time, but I urge you and encourage you to also think about this and to begin, I guess, forming movements. I've been looking for different movements that are already out there that are talking about this issue, and there are some that are forming, but I think this is early days, because I really do think that this is extremely dangerous, and I know a lot of other people that think that as well. This is something that is truly unprecedented, that for the first time, us as humans are actually are really in danger. I mean, you can argue that with nuclear weapons. We entered this period of history where I guess technically re-entered a period of history where humanity as a whole was under threat. But because at some point, our species, I guess not directly our species, but the genus Homo hominoids were sharing the planet with other living things that had, and we weren't as dominant as we are right now. But nuclear weapons, I don't think they could ever kill literally everyone. And there's a lot of difference between killing most people and killing literally everyone. Because if you kill most people, humanity recovers. Humans are very tough. And life in general is very tough. And if you stomp it out, it can continue to grow and to spread, and it's resilient. But if you kill everyone, then that means no more humans. All those thousands of generations in the future, generations and generations of happy people, that will never happen. And that's a very serious danger. Even those that don't think that this is I think that this is very likely. If you don't think this is very likely, a lot of people are still saying it's 10% likely, 20% likely that humanity will be wiped out. That's crazy. And I think it's incumbent on us to really step up and to begin working seriously to organize so that we're ready. We don't waste those 2 years. And I finally want to leave you with one positive sign that I've seen recently, which is that when this issue with sycophancy first came to the public consciousness, the issue where there was, I think, one or maybe multiple cases where individuals were seemed to have been driven to suicide and assisted in suicide by models. There was a large outcry about this. It garnered a lot of media attention, and it broke into the mainstream, into the public consciousness. And I think that shows that in the subconscious of people, there is this latent fear of a foreign intelligence. There really is, like Terminator. That is like in the zeitgeist. It's in the subconscious of people. That image of existential risk to humanity. And I think that is part of the reason that everyone latched on when these stories first coming out about this issue. So I think there's a great appetite in the public for this. And I think that when the crises start, the overwhelming majority of people who are by nature conservative and who care about humanity as a whole and about their children and their families, the vast majority of people will want to stop this. And the whole danger is that there will be a highly motivated minority who will not want to stop for possibly good reasons, but possibly also for bad reasons as well. Like imagine if humanity ends because of the greed of some people. That would be a really sad way to go. But I do think that so in some ways I'm more hopeful about the political solution than I think a lot of people that are worried about this are. A lot of people feel like humanity won't rise to the occasion. I think humanity very well would rise to the occasion. I would bet that humanity will rise to the occasion because there will be signs. And I do think people will pay attention to the signs. But we just need to make sure that those who kind of like are seeing this problem coming on the horizon, we need to be sure now that we can guide humanity, guide the public around one or two major pitfalls that might occur between the crisis period and the existential catastrophe period. We need to make sure that you don't get that situation where a few crises come up and companies start pushing their research internally. And other pitfalls like this. So now I don't want to make you complacent. I think this is still, it's absolutely, I don't know. I oscillate between between how pessimistic I am about this whole thing. I think it might be a legitimate 50-50 whether humanity will rise to the occasion or not. Anyways, I don't want to take too much time now. I've been going for almost, I see 40 minutes now. So I'll just stop here. But thank you very much for listening. And yeah, I'll talk to you later.